Really looking forward to our next fight coming up at the welterweight division, Matt. We have a couple of guys making their respective UFC debuts as the monster Louis Cosce is taking on Sasha Palatnikov, fighting out of Hong Kong. And I put it there, United States and Hong Kong, just because he's training out of Vegas with Syndicate MMA, Coach John Wood in the corner. Matt, a lot of people might be familiar with Sasha Palatnikov. If you follow at all our pals over at South China Morning Post, we got Nick Atkin, and we have the man, JHK MMA himself, and he's been featured on Fight Night Picks, so I can say friend of the show. I was actually on their show a couple of weeks ago. They have had a lot of interviews with Sasha Palatnikov. There's been a lot of stories with the South China Morning Post written about Sasha Palatnikov, and what can I say? First world champion from the country of Hong Kong, and it's really exciting to see a fighter representing Hong Kong. You just don't see it very often, and Sasha Palatnikov, for what it's worth, 5-2 total record. You've seen the power. You saw it in his last fight against a short notice opponent. And it was a late change for him in that fight where he's taking on Paulo Henrique, a guy who was a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, who kept his hands incredibly low and showed very, very poor striking defense. Now, Matt, he was originally supposed to be taking on Omar Hussein, a guy that a lot of people might be familiar with from the regional scene with UAE Warriors. Unfortunate that that fight didn't materialize because at the time, Hussein 7-1. And I mean, for Palatnikov, he has taken on a recognizable name, and I have to say a very recognizable name. Back at UAE Warriors 8, he took on Munir Lazez. And with full transparency, I've got a lot of different regional names that I have scribbled down on a notepad, like, hey, you should watch her fights or watch his fights, and I'll throw a couple of them at you right now. Finland's Abdul Hussein, not Omar Hussein, but Abdul Hussein. His nickname's Abba. He's 7-1. You gotta watch him. Look him up on Tapology. Go watch some of his fights. Just take my word for it, but definitely somebody to watch. Another name is Brazil's, and this is going to be a really tough one, Jackson Lujo. He is a guy that you definitely need to watch at 11-1-1. It was unfortunate that his fight a few weeks ago fell out. Jackson Lujo is definitely one of those guys. My last name that's on my list, and it's a guy that you might have heard of before, but you might really not have, Milos Janicic. And he's a guy that fought at KSW 51, came out on the losing end of the fight that he was in. But I mean, the kid right now, 13-3, still very young, plenty of finish wins on his record. Just picked up a submission win a couple of weeks ago. Another name to keep on your radar. All of that to say, Sasha Palatnikov is one of those guys, just from paying attention to the South China Morning Post, I've really seen a lot of interviews and tape on this fighter. And it was one of those ones where, scratch the Munir Lazez fight. At the time going into that one, he was 4-1. He was really riding high. He had just picked up a win at AFC 12 against Sungwon Sun. And in that fight, he looked really good. I mean, he took the fight to the ground. He showed really good IQ staying on top. Ended up getting the win in that one by decision. Now, Matt, the thing for Sasha Palatnikov, again, coming out of Syndicate MMA, I think there's some similarities between his game and one of his training partners. And this is a little bit of a stretch, but you can see it from maybe even just the way that he looks. Sean Strickland. And I know if you went on to his Instagrams, he was riding high with Sean Strickland. Big win over Brendan Allen last weekend. But for Sasha Palatnikov, nice spinning attacks, crisp boxing, decent head movement, and he throws a lot of straight punches, which is something that you like to see. He's not going out there and headhunting. But the man on the left-hand side, Matt, Louis Cosce, sitting at 7-0, all 7 wins, first-round finishes. What can you tell me about him?
So if you do a really big deep dive on Louis Cosce's record, you're going to be a little bit underwhelmed. And Craig's going to throw some stats at you right now. And
May
again,
I?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, so Louis Cosce, before his last fight, his combined opponent's record was 34-61. And I have to say, the fight that really, maybe got him a little bit of notoriety, we could talk about the Sir Gregory McCowan win. But it was really the fight after that. He was 3-0 going into a fight with Danny McWilliams. And you might say, Danny McWilliams, he's fought some guys I've seen before.
One or two.
Well, he fought the Shabazian brothers and lost to both of them by first-round finish. He also fought both of the Cosce brothers in the same month last year of August and got finished in the first round by both brothers.
And you guys think Paul Felder's cool.
You could say Daniel McWilliams, he's kind of like the Buster of the family.
Hey, brother.
But overall, he's losing to all the, hey, brothers.
Oh, 100%. Now, here's the good news. When you do a deep dive on someone's record, you do see that they fought some underwhelming talent. It does matter how they beat them. The great news for Cosce is he is blowing the doors off all of these kind of lesser-known opponents. And then the Victor Reina fight going into the Contender Series, Reina was a guy who you finally thought of as, okay, it's finally a live opponent, to use a boxing term, where Cosce should face some adversity. Cosce went out there and looked kind of like an orthodox Jeff Neal. He threw a lot of good head kicks, a lot of good body kicks. He has deceiving speed, and you had mentioned this before, but I see it a little bit as an advantage. Luis Cosce is going to be one of the smaller welterweights that you see in the UFC. He's not a big guy frame-wise. He is heavily muscled, like he's pretty thick, but he's not a big guy like a Neil Magny or even like a Kamaru Usman. When you think of him, you're like, wow, he's like 6'1" and huge. But no, Cosce's a little bit smaller. He's got more of that Drew Dober body type, but he uses it to his advantage. He's really good at blitzing forwards with big shots. He throws straight punches, he can throw overhands, but the kicking game is something that really opens up his hands. Because you think of him, you go back and watch a lot of his fights, he is very boxing heavy and he is a bit of a headhunter, but that body kick and that head kick that he can throw with that back right power leg is a really nice combo. It just kind of complements the boxing ability of Cosce very nicely. But with Palatnikov, sort of the ultimate kind of just good at everything, jack of all trades, if you will. He can get the fight done on the ground. He has good ground and pound, especially from on top. The submission game isn't really the forefront of his game. He can really... It's more if he beats you up with his ground and pound, the submission could open itself up. Like you had mentioned, though, the spinning attacks in the feet, something you have to watch out for, because he's not a guy who overuses them. I think that people who do spinning attacks a lot of the times, they throw too many of them. Think to Zabit, for instance, or even Edson Barboza. They'll land 1 or 2 throughout a fight, and those will be the ones that you remember. But throughout the fight, they'll miss 8, 9, 10 of them, and that just saps a lot of your energy. I like how Palatnikov only pulls it out when he thinks it's useful.
I mean, when you're a Merab and I have to do it, insert the Matt Serra, come on, Merab! But when Merab gets that spinning elbow knockout over Raufeon Stotts to get him into the dance, he just decides, I'm going to take off like a helicopter every fight. And the kid has expendable energy. So, I mean, he's like an Energizer bunny. He could just go for days. But you're right. Sasha Palatnikov only throws it. It tends to be in circumstances where you know he's not going to expend too much energy. And it's something that's available to him. We haven't really seen him get caught by too many shots off of those moves. But I mean, really, you look at it, I mean, you got the guy in the boxing gloves. You know that he's extremely well-rounded. For Luis Cosce, he's one of those guys, and we've seen this recently, especially at 170 pounds in last weekend's co-main event. Just like Chaos Williams, he can just go forward, and if he touches you with one of those hands, there's a good chance that you're going down. And in that fight against Reina, I mean, you saw exactly what he could do.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for all of those opponents whose combined record was 34-61. Luis Cosce definitely got or has a decent blueprint coming up from that regional scene, getting that win over Reina to get him over to a UFC fan base. And I would really compare him as well to another fighter that we talked about in our possible fight of the nights with Daniel Rodriguez. The guy fought not the best level of competition coming up through. You thought maybe some of them were scrubs. Same thing with Chaos Williams. You look at his record, nobody really jumps off the page before he goes in and fights Moreno and fights Abdulrazak Alhassan, and he just continues to pull through with wins. So for Luis Cosce, he could charge forward. You might worry about him taking on a really crisp striker and somebody with really good counter abilities. I mean, I think of certain fighters like if Luis Cosce, and this would never happen because Cosce is much smaller and a guy at 185, but like Uriah Hall, if you take on a very, very high-level counter striker, you're going to have some problems. But I mean, that's not until we get a lot higher up in that 170-pound conversation. And with two guys making their UFC debuts, I'm not so sure that we'll see that out of a Palatnikov. Or if Luis Cosce maybe does throw caution to the wind in his debut, do what got him to the dance, and he's going in there for that first-round finish win. Now, Matt, if we have a look at the total odds, Luis Cosce is one of the biggest favorites on this card. He opened a -365. He's now trending around a -374 over on best fight odds. If we look at Sasha Palatnikov, opened at a +275. He's now at a +289. And if we have a look at the Tapology votes, and the night's still young here, folks. Out of 360 total votes, 96% are going with the fighter from Lost Boys Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai and Luis Cosce. Hey, brother. And 80% are saying that he's going to win by knockout or TKO. Do you think that the odds and the fan votes are justified in this one, Matt? Because personally, I see it as a little bit of a closer fight.
I see it a little bit closer, but again, I'm heavily favoring Luis Cosce in this. Now, here's the one thing that everyone needs to remember. You know who else had nothing but first round finishes. I don't know why that was so hard to say. Shane Carwin. And guess what happened the second he got past the first round? Got real tired. Got down to 5,000 tired. I don't think that's going to happen to Cosce. I do think if the power doesn't get him out, or isn't able to end the fight in the first round, he should be able to hold up. I do think he can get into that little sort of Paulo Costa-y mindset where if he thinks he has a guy hurt, then let's just rush them and see what we can do. But more often than not, when you have as much power as he does, when you do go for that kill, you're going to at least find one big shot, and I do see it going that way. He might not get it done in the first round, but I do think he'll get a stoppage victory.
I mean, I think at plus 289, there's certainly value on Hong Kong's Sasha Palatnikov. Just sounds odd to say that. You don't say it very often. And again, first world champ from Hong Kong. But again, Matt, I mean, Luis Cosce seems to have that kiss of death in the first round. And he's one of those guys that can really rush forward, land with fury. He has decent defense. He has pretty good head movement. And I mean, I think the sky's the limit for Luis and Orion Cosce. So Matt, I'm in agreement. We're both going with Luis Cosce to get the win. Both guys making their UFC debut in this fight, and really looking forward to it because that's a division that's certainly wide open. We got some great fights at welterweight on this card that you're not going to want to miss out on as well. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it.